Tale of the Nine-Tailed 1938 was a treehouse drama that had a slightly grim feel to it when I watched its predecessor. It was also a bit scary, with ghosts from the past appearing in the present and disturbing Kumiho. But then Kumiko came back to haunt us again, but this time not in the present, but in the past. It took us back to 1938, a year we didn't expect at all. That's when Korea was under Japanese rule. It's very predictable what's going to happen. So it's about how to make it more interesting. First of all, Kumiho had already lived through that time because he was a mountain god, not a human. Furthermore, since Kumiho is still alive in that year, I was curious to see how we would solve it. As expected, we come up with a solution early on, and it's that Kumiho was a recluse at the time. It could be said that he left the world without being very involved in protecting the Joseon dynasty. Because we went to the Joseon dynasty, Jo Bo-ah, who was the main character of the previous game, would not appear this time. Instead, the new character was Ryu Hongju Kim So-yeon, who was a mountain god in the west. Lee Yeon Lee Dong-wook and Hongju had a long history of mutual enmity. At the same time, he was also a character who was a bit jealous of the other. On top of that, Cheon Mu-young Ryu Kyung-soo, a northern mountain god, has been chasing after Yi Yeon with bad feelings. His brother Lee Rang Kim Bum, who wasn't exactly on good terms to begin with, was even worse here. Instead of quickly finding the Guardian Stone and returning to the present day, Yi Yeon is trapped and forced to wait for a time warp. Unlike its predecessor, the action is ramped up this time around with the introduction of what could be called a yokai from Japan. On top of that, the story has a much more playful and lighthearted tone than its predecessor. Kim So-yeon is somewhat surprising to play this role. There is an image that Kim So-yeon's usual roles are rather serious and vengeful. This time, it's a little lighter and a little bubbly, which shows her charm. There's a big framework, but every episode is about fighting unexpected demons and defeating them. This time around, it's a little more action-oriented, so there's a lot to see. Whereas the last one was more narrative and had a lot of heart. In the beginning, I thought it was going to be a battle between Kumiko and the Japanese yokai. Later on, that's what it's about, but before that, it's more about him getting beaten up by Korean yokai. I think that's why it's somewhat episode-oriented without a center. If you watch this episode without watching the previous episodes, there is no problem. At least in the beginning, Lee Yeon unexpectedly travels back to 1938 and fights against the characters he meets. It serves as a character introduction, but it's also fun to watch as she meets and fights with several characters. Among the characters, I was disappointed with Sunwoo Eun-ho Kim Yong-ji. Because in the previous movie, he was a bubbly character and the lifeblood of the movie. This time around, there was less of that, and I felt like he lost some of his charm as an independent fighter. Also, this time, there was no romance as Lee Dong-wook said at the presentation, which made it a little less interesting. There was a romance between Lee Rang and Jang Yo-hee Woo Yun-jin, a mermaid, but it was a little weak because she wasn't the main character. At the end, the Shinigami mercenaries were brought in by Ryuhei Kato Hado Kwan, the head of the Governor General's office, to defeat Yi Rang's group. The last 2 or 3 episodes of the movie are about them going head-to-head with each other, which is fun. Although I wish there was a little more tension in the story. I enjoyed the previous installment, which emphasized the narrative a bit more than this one, which had a lot of action and drama.